This is the work of Duane Toops. Part of the joy of exploring these rich layers of collage is tracing back different parts and pieces, imagining their sources, then seeing them satisfyingly recontextualized, pulling from a plethora of contextually disparate scraps. Toops converges them through arrangement into these flavoursome pieces of visual poetry. But what is the secret to producing so much quality collage? Well, Toops tells us in this special Q&A. I'll be sharing my favourite points in the comments below, where I invite you to tell us what you found most interesting. So, take a listen. Okay, thanks so much for your time. I'll just jump straight into these questions. So, how did you begin? How did you get interested in this mixed medium, collage style, graphic design kind of work? And how would you describe this style? I definitely get David Carson type vibes from your work, so could you maybe share some influences that you've had?
Parker Palmer says that some journeys are direct and some are circuitous. I think mine has certainly been on the circuitous end of the spectrum. I drew a lot as a kid and loved comic books. I was enamored by the power of words and images to convey story and narrative, but I just didn't have the talent or the skill to pursue something like that. I still loved the visual arts. I was introduced to abstract expressionism and specifically Jackson Pollock by a high school art teacher, and encountering Pollock completely shifted the world for me. It radically changed my ideas about what art could be, but painting was also a creative language that I just could never quite learn to speak. From there, I drifted from creative pursuit to creative pursuit, from videography and cinematography to photography and writing and music, looking for that one outlet that scratched the itch of something I couldn't pinpoint or couldn't name. Eventually, I found my way into collage accidentally through Austin Kleon by dabbling in cutout poetry and blackout poetry. And as I encountered those collage qualities and collage elements, I started finding my creative voice, and I started finding what would be my mother tongue artistically. It's funny that so much of my work is still centered on this culmination of words and images and the way that color and texture and type can convey so much richness of meaning. It's easy to see how the likes of David Carson and Chris Ashworth could push me in that direction. They understood the aesthetic qualities of typography and what it could do in conveying meaning in new and interesting ways. I think I've taken a lot from that, and while I wouldn't consider myself a graphic designer or in any way, shape, or form, it's definitely informed the way I approach collage. I'm not sure what you would call my style. I don't think I have a name for it. I think with each piece I make, I'm actively trying to define what it is to myself. I'm trying to discover what it is and what it means. I think what my work is about is the fragmentary nature of being and the fragmentary nature of selfhood and personhood and identity. I think it's about narrative and memory and history. I think there's a sedimentary quality to my work, as if you're examining layers of geological history that's come about through time and pressure and wear and erosion. I think my work isn't so much about what's shown, but what's hidden, not so much what's on the surface, but what's been buried.
Could you tell us a little bit about your creative process? How do you start a piece? Do you go in knowing what you want to make, or do you just wait and see? And can you tell us how you know when you've actually finished a piece?
I'm very disciplined and regimented when it comes to my creative process. I'm probably almost even ritualized about it. And yet trying to describe it is elusive. I suppose it's paradoxical that way. I never plan anything in advance. I never start with an idea. I just have a collection of old books and magazines and scraps and fragments and these things that speak to me in some way. And every day in my studio, I shuffle them around and move them about until something starts to say something. I'm always looking for something. It's an active discovery. It's a call and response. It's a matter of attention and awareness. And I never get tired of that process. How I know when a piece is finished is another really difficult question. I feel like in some ways, if I knew that, I would have solved the mystery of the entire endeavor. But for me, I think some of the times I'm lucky enough to just feel it, to just know that this piece is done and there's a sense of completion and wholeness about it. But most of the time, I stumble into the realization. I realize that everything I'm adding to the piece is detracting from it. And the more I take away, the more I realize that at such and such stage, it was finished all along.
Can you tell me what life was like before social media? And I mean specifically in terms of as a creative or an artist, how would you see other artwork? How would you share your own creative work? And do you think social media has been for the better or for the worse, especially for artists?
I grew up in a really small rural town, and this was not only pre-social media, this was pre-internet. So creative life for me was isolated and secluded and ultimately lonely. There was no art culture. There was no creative scene. I only had access to those types of things through what I could find in books and magazines and other media. There were very few people that shared my interests, so I felt that I didn't quite fit in anywhere, and it was really difficult to find my footing. Fast forward to the advent of the internet and social media, and it was like the world opened up to me. I had access to art and artists and styles and forms of creative expression and outlets that I had never had access to before, that I didn't even know were there. And ultimately, I found community and fellowship and inspiration in ways that I could have never expected. Ultimately, it was that really brought me to collage. Even today, that's still largely how I would describe my relationship with social media. It continues to be a source of community and inspiration for me. Every day I get to engage with artists from around the world who have continued to be so generous and compassionate and kind with their time and with their insight and with their expertise. And there's not a doubt in my mind that there's no way I could be doing any of the work I'm doing now had it not been for them. But even with that said, social media is a fickle mechanism. It doesn't always bring out the best in us. It was designed to be addictive and attention stealing. So I do make it a point to bring a great deal of mindfulness and awareness to not only how much I use it, but to the ways I use it. I bring a lot of intention with me when I step into these platforms. I always say that I want to be the type of fan or the type of follower or the type of subscriber that I wish I had. So yes, I do share my work, but I spend more of my time in these places sharing the work of people I respect and admire, sharing work that I think is significant, sharing work that inspires me to be the best artist that I can be.
Do you have any early or unseen work that you've made that you could actually share with us?
I definitely have some early work that I can share. I can give you a sampling of some of the earliest phases of where I started and where it all began in some sense. I can show you one of my early analog pieces. I can show you an early attempt at some digital work, and then I can show you one of the collage cutout poems that I spent a lot of time on early on.
Now, I have to say, it's kind of insane to me just how much work you've posted to your Instagram in such a relatively short time. So I would love to know if you have a routine or maybe a workflow that you follow that enables you to produce so much work. What advice in general would you give about just making more artwork?
There's a lot of factors involved in my productivity and my creative output. I'm not a full-time artist. I have a day job. I have a family. I have all the regular responsibilities and obligations of normal life, and I struggle with depression. So routine and ritual are key for me, especially creatively. I'm very disciplined and regimented when it comes to my daily practice. Every day after work, I go to my studio space and I work for 2 hours. And within those 2 hours, my goal is to create 2 collages. Now, what's behind that and what drives that and what makes that work is a lack of preciousness. I'm not precious about the things that I make. I'm not shooting for excellence necessarily. I'm not striving for greatness or masterpieces. Elizabeth Gilbert says that you may want your work to be perfect, but I just want mine to be done. And that resonates with me. I think that's my mentality and my mindset when I go into my studio. I'm just looking to build momentum and muscle memory. I'm just looking to get things down on paper. I make quick decisions and I try not to overthink it, and I try to embrace what happens and see where it goes. And I think that's exactly the advice I not only give to someone looking to make more work, but to anyone looking to make work at all. Anne Lamott says that there is liberation in a bad attempt. And I think that's absolutely true. There is something liberating and powerful about just making things, just making the things that you want to make for no other reason than you want to make them and you want them to exist in the world. There's something powerful about falling in love with the how of the making rather than the what of the made. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't matter, because if you have a daily practice and if you embrace that process and that routine, tomorrow you'll be back again and you'll do it all over and it'll get a little better every time, every day.
Okay, what number one bit of advice would you give your younger self?
If I could give my younger self any piece of advice, it would be exactly that advice as well. If I had learned to be less precious, if I had learned to let go of perfectionism so much earlier on, I think my creative life and my creative journey would have been so much calmer, so much more peaceful, and certainly much less turbulent and tumultuous than it has been.
And the most important question is, how and where can people support you?
The best way to support me or connect with me or engage with me or my work would definitely be through either Substack and or Instagram. I post a newsletter through Substack twice a week, every week. It's full of collages and thoughts on creativity, on my creative process, workflow, whatever's on my mind that week, maybe things I've read or interesting things that I think are worth sharing. And a lot of the work that's in those newsletters is what gets posted over to Instagram. So either way, you definitely get access to what I'm doing and what I'm up to. I just want to say thanks so much for having me and for listening to me and giving me the opportunity to talk about these things. This has been a really enjoyable experience, and you've made this really easy for me, and I really appreciate your time and your attention.
A huge thank you to Toops. I find this sentiment about not letting perfectionism stopping you from producing work very relatable and actually motivational. And this idea that each piece is an active search towards defining art style is a new and helpful insight. But let me invite you to tell us what you found most interesting below in the comments. See you there.